Started. My name is Isaac Reichman. I'm the Director of Public Information at the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Navigating Chicago's New Indoor Dining Regulations. Today is specifically going to focus on the new regulations for indoor dining at bars, restaurants, and events. However, I will touch on a couple other topics for other businesses as well. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I'm sure for the majority of you, this is not your first webinar. This webinar, though, is going to be recorded. You can find this webinar, hopefully it'll be up by tomorrow on our page, youtube.com/Chicago BACP. Again, that's youtube.com/Chicago BACP. We hold these webinars pretty regularly, as often as changes are made on the regulations, which, as you know, there's been a lot of changes recently, which is a really good sign that we're continuing to move forward towards more and more reopening. A big portion of today, I want to make sure to save some time for questions. If you have any questions, please use the chat for those questions. Again, please use the chat for questions, and I'll do my best to answer them here. If not, you can email those questions to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. You can see that on the bottom of every page. You can also, I'm typing it into the chat right now in case you want to copy and paste that one. Again, you can send questions to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Today's a pretty short webinar. We have half an hour scheduled for this one because there is really only one change that we're talking about today, but I want to provide an overview of all the different regulations and where we're at right now and kind of point a little bit to the future. So before getting into the specifics, I want to provide, again, for folks that have seen this before or perhaps new for some folks, an overview of the City of Chicago COVID-19 reopening risk matrix. So just last week, the City of Chicago announced formally the 4 metrics that we're going to be looking at as we hopefully continue to do more and more reopening. And those 4 metrics are new total COVID cases diagnosed each day, COVID test positivity rate, emergency department visits for COVID-like illnesses, and ICU beds occupied by COVID patients. You can find all of this information at the website on our COVID dashboard at chi.gov/COVID-. So these are the 4 metrics that the city is using to determine when and how quickly we will be reopening. For each of these different metrics, there's very high risk, moderate risk, lower risk, and controlled transmission. You can see here, our goal is to get and to stay in at least that moderate risk level. Truly, our goal is to keep going down and down on all of these to lower risk and eventually in controlled transmission. But in the short term, our goal was to get to moderate risk and then to stay at moderate risk. And as you can see now, as of this past Sunday, we have made it to that moderate risk level in all 4 of these metrics. So the one that was most recently in higher risk was COVID cases diagnosed per day. And as of this past Sunday, we were under 400 and we've stayed under 400 since then. We're currently at 340 new cases per day on the 7-day rolling average. Our positivity rate is down. It's the lowest it's ever been. Actually, the last couple of days, it's the lowest it's ever been since we started measuring it back in March. So that's really, really great news. 3.6% in that lower risk level. Emergency department visits, as of, I believe, just today, have now moved into the lower risk level, currently having 54 emergency department visits for COVID-like illnesses on a 7-day average for COVID-like illnesses per day. ICU beds are also approaching that lower risk level, currently 125 ICU beds occupied by COVID patients. This is great news. Let me thank everybody here. Just by joining this webinar, that means you're committed to following all the regulations. Trust that everybody is, wearing masks, socially distancing, keeping all this up. Really, really great news over the last few months, and especially over the last weeks and days, as we've been able to move really far towards the moderate and lower risk level across this reopening matrix. So, and I recommend again that everybody visits that chai.gov/COVID-. They update, the Department of Public Health updates that every day, typically around 7:30 at night. I recommend checking it every day, either checking it at night, checking it in the morning. I know, especially as you're seeing good news every day, it's really nice to stay on top of that. So what do these 4 metrics mean for indoor dining? As we announced last week, and as I told you all on the webinar just last Thursday, if we get to the moderate risk level for all 4 metrics for at least 3 days, we can increase to 40% capacity or 50 people, the lesser of 40% capacity or 50 people. We reached that level as of Tuesday. As of Tuesday, at the lesser of, we had 3 straight days, at least in the moderate risk level, which is why we're able to move to 40% capacity or 50 people. Now our goal is to at least stay at that moderate risk level and not to spike back up for at least 2 weeks. If we do that, that is when we can increase to 50% capacity. We'll also be looking at other changes to regulations at that time. This could happen as soon as next weekend. Those 2 weeks, as I said, started last Sunday, started on the 14th. So that means as soon as next weekend, we may, assuming that we can stay at moderate risk level or get even better, ideally, we could increase to 50%, and we could make some other changes to the regulations at that time as well. Again, I want to emphasize that this is really, really good news. I don't want to speak for the health department, but for me at least, I think we got to this 40% capacity really, really quickly. And that's a really good sign that we are doing the right thing, that our numbers are moving in the right direction, and hopefully they'll continue to move in the right direction and we can be at 50% capacity indoors really, really soon. But want to reiterate and want to remind everybody to stay diligent. The fact that we are able to increase capacity, the fact that we're doing so great in our numbers cannot be an excuse to stop following all the regulations. All those other regulations remain in place, and I'm going to talk about those for a little bit. You know, BACP is still going to be out enforcing this. And we want to make sure that, you know, again, just because we can open up more indoors, if anything, now is the time to double down on all those other rules, on face coverings, on social distancing, on making sure people are seated while they're eating, because we want to make sure we're able to continue moving forward. So I'm going to provide a quick overview now of all industries of where we're at right now. Then I'm going to talk about bars, restaurants, and events in a little bit more detail. So first, bars and restaurants. Again, indoor service is allowed at 40% capacity or 50 people, whichever is fewer per room or floor. Outdoor service, obviously not a lot of outdoor service going on this week, but outdoor service is still permitted, and you're not subject to any capacity restrictions for outdoor service, provided that tables are 6 feet apart and you have no more than 6 people per table. Bar seating is allowed under those same requirements for social distancing, and the operating hour limit, alcohol service ending at 11 and closing for on-site service at midnight, those regulations remain in place as well. Indoor and outdoor events are also capped at that same 40% capacity, no more than 50 people. And an indoor event at a bar, restaurant, event venue, anything like that is not an excuse to ignore social distancing and face coverings. Just because you have an event does not mean that you can ignore all the indoor dining guidelines. In fact, if you have an event, you have to follow all those same indoor dining rules. Commercial and residential buildings and hotels, also 40% capacity, 50 per space. And events, again, at hotels, at places like that, also limited to 40%, no more than 50 people. Indoor recreation, nothing's changing there. Still 40%, no more than 50 per space. Museums are the only real industry right now that isn't at 40%. They're still limited to 25%. This is something not set by the state. That's actually, it's not set by Chicago. That's actually set by the state of Illinois, and we cannot be less strict than the state. Personal services limited to 40% capacity. You can do facials, beard shaves, things like that, but make sure that the customers are only removing face coverings if they are needed for that service, and employees must keep on full PPE. Non-essential retail still limited to 40% capacity. Grocery stores and pharmacies can be at 50%. Performance venues and movie theaters also at 40%, 50 per space. Health and fitness centers still at 40% capacity, no more than 15 per class. And childcare and out-of-school programs are 17 per group for childcare. Out-of-school programs are 15 per group. So now I want to talk about the regulations for bars and restaurants, and this also applies again to indoor events. Indoor service is permitted, again, lesser of 50 people or 40% capacity, 6 people per table. Food must be available at all times. I know I've said this a number of times if folks have joined webinars. This should not be a burden for a bar, tavern, brewery that wants to open. If you want to be open inside, the rule is that food must be available at all times. That does not mean you need to have a formal partnership with a restaurant. That doesn't mean you need to provide the food. All that means is that customers must be able to order food and eat that food in your establishment all times you're open. This can be as simple as posting a menu from a neighboring pizza place and allowing that pizza place to bring their food in, or for people to go and get it and bring it back. It can be as simple as partnering with a third party, not even partnering with a third party delivery service, but just saying that a third party company can deliver to your place. Grubhub, Uber Eats, DoorDash. It's really as simple as that. Bar seating is allowed with 6 feet of social distancing between parties. So again, you can do bar seating. You must have 6 feet of social distancing between parties. And those same rules, no more than 6 people per table, also no more than 6 people per party at a bar. Fully enclosed tents are considered indoors. So fully enclosed tents are allowed, must be limited to that 40% capacity or 50 people. Again, I know there's not a lot of, it's weird to talk about outdoor service when there's 2.5 feet of snow on the ground, but it is permitted under existing regulations. Sidewalk cafes, outdoor patios, expanded outdoor dining, rooftops and retractable roofs. Outdoor tents that are at least 50% open are considered outdoors. Igloos and other one-party enclosures are also considered outdoors and not limited to these same capacity restrictions. Finally, indoor spaces that are within 8 feet of a wall that has at least 50% of the wall removed, also considered an outdoor space. Outdoor spaces still need to follow those same 6 people per table, the same operating hours, the same 6 feet per table rules. However, they are not limited to that 40% capacity limit within outdoor space. Additionally, tables that are considered outdoors don't count towards your indoor capacity. So if you have tables that are within 8 feet of a wall that is at least 50% open, those do not count towards your 50 people or 40% capacity indoors. A quick note, obviously we've just had a big snowstorm. Want to make sure that folks are clearing the snow from there. If you have any awnings or canopies or things like that, want to make sure that folks are clearing the snow from that, making sure that to inspect them, and that we're not causing any safety issues by having snow built up on canopies and places like that. Additionally, as a reminder, businesses are responsible for ensuring that there is a proper sidewalk clearance in front of their establishment. So just a reminder here, We're here talking about the regulations, COVID regulations. Just a reminder to make sure to be responsible with this winter weather. Face coverings must be worn in all indoor or outdoor public settings, except when seated or and actively eating or drinking. This is whether indoors or outdoors, face coverings must be worn at all times. This is one of the main things that we're issuing citations for. If we see folks, if we show up at a business, even if they're not over capacity, and we see 15 people standing nearby without masks on, eating and drinking, or that are, walking around without their face coverings on, that's an easy citation for us. Tables, again, must be 6 feet apart. Patrons must be seated while eating or drinking. This is probably one of the biggest things we've been seeing recently is now that you can be open indoors, is people walking around in close quarters eating and drinking. This is not allowed. Just this weekend, we cited a business. The business was not over capacity, but when we arrived, there were about 25 people all crowded together without face coverings on, eating and drinking in very, very close proximity to each other while standing up and mingling. That is not allowed. Patrons must be seated when eating or drinking. Again, events are allowed, but they must follow all of these same rules. If we show up at a business and we see them, again, in close proximity, ignoring the rule to be seated while eating or drinking, if the business says, oh, it's a private event, that's not an excuse to ignore these rules. Reservations are encouraged. A 2-hour, some sort of time limit is also encouraged, but those things are not required. Sale of alcohol must still end at 11, and establishments must close for on-site service by midnight. Pickup or delivery of food can continue at all licensed hours. So no change at this point for the operating hours for businesses. That is something that is under consideration as we hopefully, again, stay at moderate risk for at least 2 weeks. Great, I'm now gonna open it up for a couple questions. Again, the only change that came into effect this week as of Tuesday was increase to 40% capacity with a maximum of 50 people. No other changes. Had a question about health and fitness centers. It's 40% capacity for your general space. It's also, and then classes are limited to no more than 15 people. Classes are limited to no more than 40% capacity or 15 people, whichever is fewer. So we still have a rule in place, no more than 15 people in a class. Get a question about neighborhood outdoor summer festivals. Don't think we have too much insight to add at that to answer that question at this point. I'm happy to check in with our colleagues over at the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. Feel free to send us an email to BACP Outreach, and I'll see if we can provide a little more guidance. Had a question here. Can you discuss live entertainment in restaurants and bars where food is served? Is it allowed? What are the guidelines? Yes, live entertainment is allowed. You can have bands, you can have singers, things like that. Performers must be wear face coverings except when they're actively performing. They can remove them. Obviously, singers, trumpet players can remove their face covering. They must be 10 feet away from any patrons, but they are allowed in restaurants and bars. Right. I have a couple questions about when I think some changes will be made, such as when will standing up cocktail party happen, and when will the operating hours be lifted. Unfortunately, I don't have too much insight on that. Again, I'm the messenger from BACP. I know that these are things that the Department of Public Health is actively looking at. I know, again, the operating hours is something in particular that they're looking closely at. I don't have any formal information on when that will change. Again, same with questions about wedding season coming up. We know that that's something that's really important. but we don't have additional guidance at this point. I promise I'll share it as soon as we do. Great question. Are darts and pool playing allowed? Yes, activities like darts, pool playing, any sort of other arcades, that stuff is allowed. But as a reminder, as you can see on this slide right here, patrons must be seated when they're eating or drinking. So you can play pool, you can play darts, but the folks cannot be eating and drinking while they are doing that. In fact, they must have their face coverings on, because remember, face coverings must be on except when actively eating or drinking. So darts is allowed. If you don't think that you can stop your customers from drinking while playing darts, then you should have the darts closed. If you think you can control that and make sure that folks are not eating or drinking while they're playing, then you can allow darts, pool, arcade, things like that to be open. Great. Again, if anyone has any questions, please send those via email. Really, I hope to be back next week to announce some additional changes. Want to, make sure that we continue to move in this in the positive direction. I'll again say before wrapping up, I was surprised at how quickly we were able to get under 400 cases a day and under 5%, significantly under 5% positivity. It's really, really good news, but we can't let up. We need to remain diligent while we are excited to be open more. We're excited to be moving in the right direction. We will be enforcing, and we need to, we are hopeful that we can keep moving. Had a question here, when did we move into the current phase of the city's matrix? I'll actually pull that slide back up. We moved into moderate risk as of this past Sunday, February 14th. Again, our first day under 400 cases. I think we're at 394 as of this past Sunday, which means that 3 straight days was as of this Tuesday, which is why we're able to expand to this 40% capacity. So then 2 weeks, to pull it out from there, will be next Saturday, would be 2 weeks from then. Hope to have more information to share, hopefully in advance of that. Had a question, is this a recurring webinar? I host a webinar every single time there's any sort of change. So if we have any other announcement, I will certainly be hosting one, if not many additional webinars here. Had a question, please confirm the earliest date to move to 50% is February 28th. Yes, I can confirm. Will the 50% include a maximum guest limit? I'll say that is something that's under consideration, and know that that's something that's actively under consideration by the health department. So I don't have a definitive answer on that at this point. Before we end, I want to make sure to provide some other additional business updates. As a reminder, all licenses have been extended, all BACP licenses. So licenses that would expire between March 15th of last year and June 15th of this year will be considered active until July 15th. Additionally, all current sidewalk cafes will be extended for 2 months. Typically right about now is when there would be a lot of push to get your new sidewalk cafe permit by the end of February. But where everyone who has a current sidewalk cafe permit, they'll remain active until May 1st. Additionally, all of the sidewalk cafe reforms that we put in place for last year will be in effect for this year, meaning sidewalk cafes will have a 75% reduction in fee. They will not have to go through city council for approval, and they will, restaurants will be able to expand in front of the business next to them. Additionally, the expanded outdoor dining program that I know a lot of businesses took part in 2020 will be extended through the end of 2021 as well. Obviously, as we get back into the warmer season, hopefully not too long from now, we will have more information to share on that. Also, I know all of you are hopefully aware of the Paycheck Protection Program. Please, encouraging everybody to apply for that program. It's not something BACP oversees, but we've held a number of different webinars in English and Spanish with our partners over at the Small Business Administration and with some other lending partners. And those are all available at youtube.com/Chicago BACP. You send us an email. We're not the experts, but I can hopefully connect you with some folks if you have any questions on the Paycheck Protection Program. Great. I see a couple additional questions that have come in, so I will put it back on this slide and answer those questions. Yep. Had a question asking when businesses will get their renewals. That's something that I can check in with our licensing team and our permitting team, and we'll follow up. So please feel free to send me an email and I can get you some more information on that. Had a question, when will bar sales and closing times be pushed to late hours? Again, that's something that's under consideration. Don't have an official answer at that time, but we'll hopefully have something to share soon. Great question. Do you foresee the increase to 50% also applying to indoor events as well? That is something that we anticipate. Typically, we try to make it so indoor dining guidelines are very similar to events guidelines, because often bars and restaurants will have events. So we want to make sure that those guidelines align. So I do anticipate that the 50% increase will also apply to events. Right. Again, we're at our half-an-hour time. Thank you all for joining. Thank you immensely for your commitment to following these rules and keeping your customers and your employees safe. We want to thank you all for, I know it's been an incredibly challenging last 11 months, but we're at a really good point right now, and we hope to keep moving in this great direction. So thank you all.